Alright people, welcome back to Arcane Sword Miniatures. Today we're going to be painting the master of the Deathwing, Belial. This is a model that's been sitting in my backlog for longer than I care to admit, and we're just going to get him painted up today. We've got him primed with our Wraithbone, and I realized before we get started that I forgot to drill out his gun barrels. So we're going to take our little motorized pin vise here, and we're just going to drill those out real fast. And there we go. His gun barrel's now drilled out. He is ready to go on to painting. Now, with him already being primed in Wraithbone, we are going to step into getting his armor to the shade we want it to. I am going to cheat a little bit and use an airbrush. This is just for speed more than anything else, but you don't have to use an airbrush if you don't want to. And we're just going to get him coated in Screaming Skull real fast. Now, to do this, I like to use these little mixing cups, I call them. They're technically shot glasses, but they're disposable and fun. Just going to get a brush, get it loaded with paint, get that down there, and get your medium. And get them mixed up. Next thing you're going to do, the next thing that you're going to do is get your airbrush out. Go ahead and get it loaded with your paint. You want kind of a milky consistency. And then we're going to start airbrushing. With that airbrush coat now applied, we are ready to continue on with cleaning up that armor. We've got a good, nice Screaming Skull base coat all set and ready to go. Next, what we're going to do is get our palette back. And with our palette ready to go, we're going to take a 1-to-1 mix of Ushabti Bone and XV88 and turn that into a glaze. We're going to take our shade and essentially put it on the lower parts, the lower half of each of these plates. Create a nice little gradient that his armor will have. Now, when I first got into Warhammer, I really had no care for the Dark Angels. But after their resculpts, the night vibes on them are just so high that I couldn't help but start collecting them. They've got armor, they've got swords, they've got robes. They just look cool. And if you're on this step and you're thinking that it doesn't look like it's doing much, you're right. It's not. But it adds a really nice effect once it's all done. With that glaze now applied, we get to let it sit and dry for just a moment, and it's all meant to kind of just cover the lower halves of his armor to really pull in a gradient effect. Alright, with that glaze now a bit more dry, we get to do our next step in this process, which is going to be to take some straight XV88 and glaze that down with our glaze medium. And what this will allow us to do is add to that gradient and just darken down the lowest parts of the plates. With that XV88 applied, it is a little splotchy looking at the moment, but don't worry, it will get blended and cleaned up in the next few steps. With that XV88 wash now dry, I have realized I made a mistake. It's alright, it happens to all of us. But it does mean that we're going to have to fix it now rather than later. So, we're going to go back to our XV88 Ushabti mix, and we're going to cover the entirety of his armor plates with that. We need to bring more warmth into the plates than the Screaming Skull will provide. Sometimes when you're painting, you just realize what you were trying to do doesn't work, and that's totally fine. With that extra coat now applied, his armor has a lot more warmth to it, and we can really start to get more details from it that way. Okay, our next step, now that the wash is dry, is to hit our recesses with a very thinned down Rhinox hide, and really just get to sink those into the details and bring out all the layers. So we have our very thinned Rhinox hide, mostly water, and we're just going to put that in little lines so it's going to wick into all those recesses, hit all those cracks in the armor, all the spaces between the plates. Instances like this, it ends up being really good to use water instead of medium, because water will change how the paint acts. So as you can see, I put a little too much of the wash there, but you can just tap it and it wicks it right up because it's water. With that detail wash now applied, we get to let that whole thing sit and dry for a couple minutes. With that now dry, we get to come back with Screaming Skull and pick out our highlights. Don't forget to thin your paints. And we are basically glazing this Screaming Skull on, because we've added all that warmth, and the last thing we want to do is get rid of all of it all over again. And there we go, we have a beautifully blended set of armor. Once that dries, we get to move on to his cloak. Okay, with all of our armor dry, it is time for us to start on our cloak. Now we will be wet blending this, but it's always good to get a good solid base coat of your mid-tone color first. So for that, we are going to be basing it in Caliban Green to start with. Caliban Green is just one of those colors that you can't paint Dark Angels without. This dark green is so iconic to the army. You can find replacements in other sets, but you gotta have that nice, rich forest green. And you want to be real careful when you get near those armor plates to not get any overspill on the shading we've already done. And if you have to get it in a weird angle like you just saw me do there, totally normal. With our base coat on his cloak now complete, we get to do the wet blend. Wet blending is a really fun technique where you take a bunch of different colors and mix them on the model itself and create essentially steps between each of these colors. So first we got to prep our palette with it. And we're going to get Caliban Green, our black, our Warpstone Glow, and our Ushabti Bone all thinned and ready to go and ready to be mixed together. And like that, we've got our 4 tones and the half steps between each tone that we can now use to blend that cape beautifully together. So we've got our base coat of Caliban Green, and we are going to start by getting our half step of black and Caliban together. And we're going to put that in our deepest shadows. So the heaviest creases in this cloak, we're just going to go ahead and line with this dark tone. Don't forget to thin it. Just go ahead and line all of our creases and folds with this dark paint. With those black shadows now applied, we're going to come in with our mix of Caliban and Warpstone and hit the raised areas in our fabric. Next, we're going to take our straight Warpstone glow and hit just the sharp edges. With those creases picked out, next we're going to take our Warpstone and Ushabti mix and just hit the corners of those creases. And there we have a very nice dynamic and blended cloak. Now we have to do the same thing on his tunic here. And with that, we have his cloak volumetrically painted along with his tabard. With that cloak now done on the outside, we get to do the insides of the cloak. We're going to do this really pretty dark burgundy color on the inside. And for that, we are going to do a 1-to-1 base of Corn Red and Incubi Darkness, and then wet blend from there. With our mix ready to go, we just start putting it on the inside layer of his cloak. It adds a lot of visual interest to the model to have dual tone cloaks. With models like Belial here, it gets lots of nooks and crannies that are hard to reach. If you are building this just to paint it, I highly recommend building him in sub-assemblies, unlike what I did. If you do what I did, you gotta just kind of reach the parts you can and hope that no one's gonna notice the parts you can't. With the base coat on the inside of his cape now done, we get to do kind of a different style of wet blend on this one, where we end up with some different types of mixes. So for this set, we're gonna do black, Incubi Darkness, Corn Red, and Dawnstone Gray. Now, altogether, these would not make a good blend, but in mixing and adjusting our base tone, they'll work very well. So you're just going to have to bear with me a little bit on this one. With that, we once again have our mixes and our halftones. We're going to go ahead and start doing our shadows. Now, our shadow mix is a little bit different this time in the fact that it is our Incubi Darkness and Corn Red mix plus black. So it ends up being a tricolor mix instead of a standard two-color mix. And then we're going to go ahead and put it in all the folds. Okay, with that shadow mix now in our folds, we go back to our original base mix and hit our flat areas. Now we take Corn Red, just straight Corn Red, and hit our volumes with it. And now that we have our volumes, we take our mix of Dawnstone and Corn, thin that down, and just hit our sharpest points. It's going to desaturate our red just a little bit. That's exactly what we want. And just like that, we have a really gorgeously blended cloak. Next, we're going to do our iconography and ropes, and for that, we are going to begin with a base of Mephiston Red. Now, Mephiston Red is a much brighter red than Corn Red, so we get a bit more vibrancy in this model. So far, Deathwing is very bone and very dark, so now we get to add that bright pop of color that we need. Alright, and there we have our base coat for the iconography done. The next step for our iconography is to wash the details with a wash made of Corn Red and black, which is going to give us a very nice deep recess. Once again, we have thinned this with water instead of medium, so that way it wicks into the recesses. With that wash complete, we give it a moment to dry. With that wash now dry, we get to highlight it back up with Evil Sun's Scarlet. With that highlight layer complete, we go up one more step with Wild Rider Red. And on this pass, we're just hitting the nice, sharp, crisp edges of these details. And there we have our iconography finished. Now we get to cheat a little bit. We're going to aim for the tubings and underlayers of this armor, all those corrugated bits in his joints. And for that, we're going to paint them black. And we're going to run with Black Legion contrast paint. Contrast paints are fun because you can just kind of use them right out of the pot, especially here with Black Legion. And we're just going to be very careful and black out those tubes. And there we go. Those details are blacked out. And now we can start highlighting them. To highlight that black, we're going to go with Mechanicus Standard Gray and Dawnstone. With those highlights done, now we can move to some silver details. To do those silver details, we're going to use Lead Belcher. Good baseline silver. With that silver now based, we get to do a black wash on it. So we're going to take a little bit of our black and thin that with a bunch of water. And this is very important on the blade, as we want to have our wash focus mostly on the bottom half of the sword. So we're going to do a few different layers to pool the wash at the bottom. With our silver details washed, we can move on to the Crux Terminatus on his knee. The Crux Terminatus is an important part of the lore for Terminators. It is said that each one holds a piece of the Emperor's golden crown inside of it, and it is usually painted as good old gray stone. So we're going to go ahead and base this and the pillar he's standing on in Mechanicus Standard Gray with our nicely thinned Mechanica Standard Gray, let's go ahead and base it. With our gray now based, we're going to go ahead and wash that Crux Terminatus, and to do that, we are going to take our watered down Rhinox hide and go ahead and fill those details with that nicely thinned paint. So we get a nice thin wash, just like that. I'm going to then take that wash and just put it all over the Crux Terminatus, wicking up any excess. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take some Dawnstone and just very gently highlight our Crux Terminatus. That layer of Dawnstone now applied, we're going to take a little bit of administrative gray and hit just our sharp details. With that Crux Terminatus now done, we get to move on to the purity seals. There's not a lot of purity seals on Belial, but we do have one here on this skeleton and way down here on his leg. And so we'll go ahead and hit those real fast while we can. We're going to start with Celestra Gray for these. With Belial's armor being already that bone color, we want to make sure that the purity seals stand out from that. So we're going to go ahead and make them white. Our next step is going to be a wash of Thunderhawk Blue on our purity seals. And remember, you want to get this nice and thin, just like that. And then we're just going to take that blue and put it all over our purity seal paper. Next up, we're going to highlight our purity seal papers with a mix of Celestra Gray and White Star. Unfortunately, as much as I love Citadel paints, the white Citadel paints are just absolutely horrendous. And you don't need to torture yourself to use them. And as a final step on these purity seal papers, we're just going to take a little bit of straight White Star and just hit our sharp edges. And there we go. Now, I know that these purity seals feel like a rather minor detail, but with how it's going to interact with the flames that we're going to paint last, it's going to look absolutely fantastic. Our next target is the actual seals on the purity seals, and we're going to hit those first with some Sigvald Burgundy. Now, Sigvald Burgundy is a contrast, so you can use it right out of the pot, and you get this nice smooth coverage. We're just going to go ahead and put it on our wax parts. Our next step is going to be our decorative metals, and we're going to start those with Warplock Bronze. Once you've gotten your good consistency, just go ahead and start picking out those details. Our decorative metals are now based. We're able to continue on with the wash of them, which will be with a Rhinox hide. Just get it nice and thin, and just go ahead and put it over those details to really make the crevices pop. With that wash now dry, we get to move on to highlighting with our Castellix Bronze. This can be a pretty liberal highlight. It's more of a layer. We're not just looking for the edges. Now we get the finishing touch on all these decorative metals with bringing it to Gehenna's Gold. Gehenna's Gold is a beautiful shade of gold, and it works really well with these darker base tones that we used. We want to get that to a good consistency, and then we're just going to hit all of our details and really just start bringing them out and contrasting with our base and wash. And remember, you always want to be pulling with the brush, not pushing. If you pull, you'll leave a more consistent layer of paint, but you'll also protect the longevity of your brushes. With our decorative metals now done, Belial himself is nearing completion. The next thing we gotta do is all of our wonderful little leather details. And for that, we are going to base those in Rhinox Hide, our favorite brown paint here on the channel. Not because it looks the best, but because it's the best base for the most applications. And then we're gonna hit his scabbards and his belt and his strap. With that base coat now applied, we're going to give it a moment to dry before we go into highlights. Our next step with that Rhinox Hide now dry is to do a shade of Rhinox Hide and black. As we're nearing the end of Belial proper and have mostly just his base remaining, it can be really tempting to skimp out on these finishing details. But trust me when I say that not skimping out on those details and holding it out until the very end is well worth it. And if you skimp out at the very end, that's all you're going to notice when you look back at this model. Now you might be wondering why we have not used any pre-mixed shade paints in this process. And that's because on Belial himself we want to maintain vibrancy. And you get much more vibrant and punchier colors by making your own washes than by using the pre-mixed ones. With our wash now dry, we're now going to do a highlight with Doombull Brown. Now, as we are putting Doombull on, we're really just looking to highlight all of our geometry here and really just get this nice, chunky kind of highlight going. We can be pretty liberal with it. Just let the light kind of play across and highlight those areas. You can already see how much more depth that's added to the strap of his gun. With that now complete, we have these beautiful rich leather straps, which we are now going to wear down. Our first layer of wear is going to be a scratchy highlight with Steel Legion Drab. And by scratchy, I mean we're just going to make little notches in the leather. Really pick out where it's worn on his armor. Maybe have some cracks in the leather. And really just show its age. On bolters like this, they'll often be in service for hundreds of years. This is probably the third or fourth strap that it's had. And we just really want to show that it's taken a toll. Kind of worn out. And we can do the same on the scabbard and on the straps. And there we go. We have our worn leather straps ready to go. Our next detail is going to be an absolute joy to paint, and that's going to be his face. Right in there, which you can barely see and I can barely reach. Because when you're doing complex models like this, you should really consider if you want to do sub-assembly or not. There's a secret trick to making faces look really good, and that is underlayering. So we're going to paint him in a standard Caucasian way, but we're going to undercoat his entire face with Wazdaka red. And we're going to do that to bring out the warmth in the paints that we're going to put on after. With that undercoat now applied, our next step is our base. And for that, we're going to do a 1-to-1 mix of Cadian Flesh and Bugman's Glow. Now, interestingly enough, the Cadian Bugman mix is one of my favorite things, and it's actually what got me into color mixing my paints in the first place, because it creates a wonderful shade that is so much better to go off of as a base than just straight Bugman's. And it looks so much more like actual skin than that weird ruddy tone that just straight Bugman's gives. With that now applied, we're already seeing a good face start to form there. Our next step is to come in with a wash of Bugman's and kind of just hit those shadows. So once you have your nice thin Bugman's Glow wash, once that face coat is dry, go ahead and thin down some pure Bugman's Glow to make a wash with it. Once you have a wash consistency that you are happy with, just go ahead and let it flow into the recessed details. Really help add some shadows to the face. Our next step is to take some pure Cadian flesh tone and hit our raised areas on his face. And there we go. His face is now complete. We have reached a major step in the project where we now get to focus on the base. Our next step is to cover the entirety of the ground with dryad bark. With our larger brush, we're just going to start plopping that everywhere. Only thing you have to be careful about is to not get it on Belial himself. Now, the classic sand-covered bases that we've been using on this army have a great sentimental look to them, but they definitely do have the issue of they are hungry for paint and they absorb so much. With that coat of dryad bark now applied, we get to pick those details out with a 1-to-1 mix of Battle Mud Wash and Anthodian Camo Shade. Now, unlike previous mixes, we're not going to mix these together on the palette and are instead going to dapple them around our base to create a shadowing effect and really just kind of get striation and variables on our base texture. With that wash now applied, we have to wait for it to dry before we move on. So we're going to shift focus onto our skeleton friend here, and we are going to start basing this skeleton with Skeleton Horde contrast paint. And we're just going to hit, once we've got our Skeleton Horde on our brush, we'll find that it's nice and thin already, and we're just going to go ahead and cover our skeleton in this. Don't worry, this is just the beginning for him. And we're also going to use Skeleton Horde to base the stick that he is plunged onto. Well, guess who forgot to turn his mic back on after recharging it? So, to catch you up on what just happened, we just put a little bit more of our Battle Mud Wash on our skeleton, who we have named Billy. Our next step is to dry brush Gorthor Brown onto our base. I always think that Gorthor Brown over Dryad Bark looks like cocoa pebbles. And now that our dry brush is done on our cocoa pebbles, we are going to make them not that by dry brushing lightly with Screaming Skull. You know something crazy? This pot of Screaming Skull still has this line mark on it. And I did that to my pots of paints back when I was working at a game store called The Puzzler. 8 years ago, and that pot is still going. Gotta love paint. And we're just gonna pretty lightly just dry brush this Screaming Skull on our cocoa pebbles. Our base is now dry brushed. It's alright that it's a little off. We'll be getting to that in a moment. Our next step is to finish up Billy. Billy needs some layering with Ushabti Bone. Once you have that paint at a good consistency, go ahead and just hit all the flat and raised areas on Billy. We really want that bone color to shine. A grim reminder of what happens to the enemies of Belial. With Billy done, he is ready to remind the enemies of the Death Watch what happens when you cross their Grand Master. Now we have a few extra tricks up our sleeves to take this from a gorgeous model for the tabletop to a model that I'd be happy to have in my display case here in my studio. And on my Deathwing, I love to give them battle damage. My idea is that their ship got shot down and they are fighting to survive on a hostile world. And so we are going to do a trick I love to do for battle damage, which is sponging. With sponge and tweezers in hand, I like to use little cast-off sponge pieces or foam pieces from storage things. This is from a little Amazon model storage box. Just go ahead and tear off a little bit of that foam and take it in your tweezers and go ahead and just tear at it a little bit, because you want those kind of fibrous pieces. And there you go, you've got your little bit of sponge. Now with this, we're going to do our first layer of battle damage. For that, we're going to take a little bit of Screaming Skull right out of the pot with our bit of sponge, just like that, and do some practice stamps until we are getting a texture that we like. Now what this will do is it will add chips and variations into his armor panels to look like it's chipping back through to the base layer of paint on his armor. Now, of the steps, this is the more subtle one. It does more on things like his red pieces, which we can have look like they're fading. And so he's going to benefit far more from our second stage of weathering. And we're going to take a little bit of Rhinox hide right out of the pot and just go ahead and start stamping all over everything. The more we add, the more damaged his armor appears, and the more battles it looks like he's fought through. Though make sure to not get the sword blade, as we're going to do stuff with that later. You also want to avoid the face, as the face, when it's unhelmeted, has lots of tiny little details that this can easily obscure. Now, it would be here that a wise painting teacher would remind you to not go all out on every model you paint, and to just make sure you pull out a couple extra stops on your hero models and the ones that you really want to be proud of. But I'm a painting masochist, and I say I paint everything to the best of my abilities at the time. Which means, yes, I do this on every single Deathwing I paint. Yes, I need help. Make sure to also hit his cloak. Focus more on the bottom edges of it, because that's where the dirt would collect and stain. Once you are satisfied with the dings and mud splatters all over him. We're going to do one more layer on him, on his combat damage, just because he is a leader in fact. And we're going to take a little bit of our Mechanicus Standard Gray. We're going to keep it relatively thick compared to what we tend to do. Just like that. We don't want to spread very much because we're going to use this to dot some of just our... We're just going to focus on using this to dot in areas that we have our largest splatters on, like right here. Just going to add a little shape of gray to that to add some depth to the splatter and make it look like it's a chip in his armor. With that now dry, we have a couple more secret weapons we can pull for Belial. Now, we have these purity seals that we worked on here, and they look wonderful, but they're missing a little something. These seals are missing their text. Now, we could freehand that text on with little squiggles, or we could use these, and these are decals. These decals are from a company called Forgotten Chapters, and they are fully text purity seals. So we're going to go with these, and we're going to use a fun little trick to do them. So our first step is going to be to get one of these cut out. Here we have our decal, and we're going to start with micro set, and we're going to take a cheap old brush like this one, and micro set, we are going to dip the tip of our brush in and put it on the part of the purity seal that we want the text to be on. Then we're going to take a little bit more of our micro set and put it on the decal itself. There we go. It took a couple of attempts, but we now have our beautiful text on our purity seal. Now we just need to give that a couple moments to dry, and then we can move on to our next step in that process. With the micro set now dry, we get to move on to stage 2, which is our micro sol. Micro sol dissolves the plastic around the decal, leaving just the ink behind. It's a very fun little tool. You want to put 1 or 2 coats on. With that micro sol now dry, we've got one final little trick up our sleeve on this decal to really mat it back down. And we're just going to take a little bit of straight Lamian medium, the same thing we've been using to thin our paints. And we're going to put that on our purity seal. When that dries, that will be a good matte finish coat on that purity seal. Our next step, we need to wait to let all of this cure. And so we will come back tomorrow morning for the same secret weapon that we used last time, our streaking grime. So I have an unfortunate decision to make with this video. With everything that needs to be done, Belial won't be finished this week. So I had a choice to make. I could either delay the video for 4 days and get all the special effects on Belial finished, or I could split the video in 2 parts and have Belial painted to table ready in this video and do all the special effects in the video next week. And as much as I hate doing 2 parts, I've really ended up needing to. So unfortunately, you will see where Belial lands with the streaking grime and the fire effects and the sword next Friday instead of today.